Okay, let's open a word of prayer. Lord, thank you for this day. Pray that you bless our time together. Pray that you always help us to remember that you are in control, even though the world seems pretty chaotic. Give us peace in a difficult world. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, today I'm taking this. This is a quote of, I think it's attributed to Lenin. Now, I've researched it. I've never been able to, of course, I don't read Russian, but, there are, he said there are decades when nothing happens, and there are weeks when decades happen. And I think that's pretty indicative of our time. And that there's a Bible prophecy from a Jewish mindset is largely based on pattern. And I've mentioned this many, many times before, that with regard to the first coming of Jesus Christ, there were many, many prophecies. And about 60%, actually, if somebody's going to fact check me, it's actually 58 or 59% of the prophecies that happened that were fulfilled in Jesus' first coming were fulfilled in that last week. There was like an explosion, an acceleration, a convergence, the things that we talk about here. And it's going to be the same way when Jesus comes back again. And it's, wow. I mean, I will tell you that I try to pare things down and sort of only hit the highlights. But there are so many things happening that are, I think, related to the setting up of things for Bible prophecy to be fulfilled, that it's impossible to keep up at this point. And everybody that I talk to that do these type of updates, say the exact same thing. I don't know how you can keep up. I don't know how you can do that. And I read copious amounts of information. And I will tell you that you get about 1/10 of what I think I could talk about each week. And I do that because, I'm a merciful man. I don't want you to have to sit and listen to me for 15 hours or whatever. But, and I know, and I appreciate people. I get comments all the time about, oh, you're just a big negative guy. It's all bad news. To which one of the comments, the responses is, well, what did you think the end times were going to look like? Honestly. And one time I was complaining to someone about that, boy, it's distressing. There's all this bad stuff happening. And the person said to me, well, John Haller, what did you think the end times are going to look like? And I'm like, you don't quote me to me. Who do you think you are? That's not fair. So we talk about this convergence of events. Here's some of the channels that we're on. And we're trying to add others. It's just that we're volunteers here, and it's difficult to get to them. So as I said, we talk about the convergence of events, how fast they seem to be happening, but that all these prophecies will eventually fit together. So this is my grid: acceleration, convergence, logistics, and understanding. And as we get closer to the time, then it will, things will become clearer. And one of the verses I use is Daniel chapter 12, verse 8. Daniel said, "Oh, my Lord, what shall be the end of these things?" And he said, "Go thy way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end. Many shall be purified and made white and tried, but the wicked shall do wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand." It also says in Daniel chapter 11 that the wise will instruct many. And I think we're at that point where we are trying to fit all of these things together. And so I don't think we're there yet where we can come up with this comprehensive, integrated view. So I talk to a lot of different people. I read a lot of different things. So I'll just give you one example. There's a controversy over what is this final Babylon going to look like? What is this final Babylon? And in Revelation, it says it's a mystery Babylon. Now, does it mean mystery Babylon? Does it mean a mystery that's now solved? Is it a mystery that it's a mystery that it's come back to life? And so depending on your view, you're going to interpret the passage that way. So there are some that believe that there'll be a literal Babylon rebuilt in Iraq. And I cannot discount that. I cannot say that that's totally false. I can say this is where my logistics thing comes in, that if it's going to be this great commercial center of the world, it has to be rebuilt. There's nothing there right now, okay? There's some commemorative restored buildings. There's nothing there. It's not a port. It's very far inland from being a port. So maybe it will be, but I'm just saying is if it is Babylon rebuilt, then there's some things that are going to happen. I mean, I use the example of Dubai in the United Arab Emirates. That thing's been being built over the last 40 years, a lot of it in the last 25. And they have some, tallest buildings on the planet and that sort of thing. But it took a while to build that. So there's a logistics aspect there. Some people believe that Babylon is Jerusalem. And I won't go into that. That's not a view that I hold. And there are good people out there that make the case for that. And then there are other people, some of them my friends who've written books about, and others who've sent me wonderfully, I think, thought out things that America is the final Babylon. And if you read through Jeremiah 50 and 51 and try to apply those scriptures to a modern day country, I think you would come to the point that maybe it is America. And so then the question is Babylon in Iraq, or is it a figurative thing that, and then you get into all these arguments and everybody's sure they're right, and then nobody will talk to you if you don't agree with them. And a lot of times, and it's the same thing on the timing of the rapture and that type of thing. You have a number of different views on the timing of the rapture. And when you sit down and you talk to people, they agree on like 99.95%. They disagree on timing, but if you don't hold their view of the timing, then they won't talk to you. Or they won't, we all agree there's pretty much in the futurist community that there's a rapture at some point. And I hope for it, but I also know that a man that I met a number of times and had conversations with, Dr. Ed Hindson. Some of you know him. He passed away the other day. I think he was 77. He was in Grace Seminary taking some graduate courses and spoke at chapel a number of times when I was at Grace College back in the 70s. So that's where I first became familiar with him, and then I got to know him over time. But great guy, great teacher, and I don't know that rapture timing is important to him right now. He's probably got other things that he's taken care of. And praise the Lord, we know we'll see him. As one comment I saw this morning, somebody said, hey, Christians die, it's not goodbye, it's see you later. But we don't know when that moment is. I'm sure that the morning that he got up and ended up in ICU and then passed away, he thought he was going to do something tomorrow. Or he thought maybe he was going to do something with his grandchildren on the 4th of July. But God had other plans. And having known Ed for a while and been around him, I know that he lived with that expectation that at some point, I'm going to meet the Lord, whether I die or I'm raptured. So that's one thing. So let me just read you. There are some times where this is a passage, Psalm chapter 2, that I sort of conclude that this is a hopeful prophecy about what's happening. Why do the nations rage and the people plot a vain thing? The kings of the earth set themselves and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, let us break their bonds in pieces and cast away their cords from us. He who sits in the heavens shall laugh. The Lord shall hold them in derision. Then he shall speak to them in his wrath and distress them in his deep displeasure. Yet I have set my king on my holy hill of Zion. I will declare the decree. The Lord has said to me, you are my son. Today I have begotten you. Ask of me, and I will give you the nations for your inheritance, and the ends of the earth for your possession. You shall break them with a rod of iron. You shall dash them to pieces like a potter's vessel. Now therefore be wise, O kings of the earth. Be instructed, you judges of the earth. Serve the Lord with fear and rejoice with trembling. Kiss the Son, lest he be angry and perish in the way, and you perish in the way, when his wrath is kindled but a little. Blessed are all those who put their trust in him. So we know that God's going to make this right. And it does seem that there's an awful lot that's not going right. So I'm hesitant right at the moment. I'm not sure which bad news I should start with. I'm going to jump down here to I'll start with this. This is a chart from the Wall Street Journal yesterday. It can always get worse. And if you've been following the financial things, and I see financial blogs and they say, don't look at your 401k. Just don't do it. It'll be too distressing. And we live at a time where there's so much happening. It is unbelievable. And just when as I said, I try to keep up on things, and just when I think I've kind of got my head wrapped around one thing, boom, here comes another thing that I hadn't seen. And everybody blames, for example, everybody will blame the war in Ukraine. And it's not the war in Ukraine. You'll see a chart here in just a moment that is absolutely stunning. But the markets are down. Worst downturn in the markets in 50 years. 6 months, it's been terrible. It's been a bloodbath. And some people say it's just a correction, just a minor bump in the road. Everything will get better. And some people say, yeah, it's going to get better in 30 or 40 years. It'll be back to normal. And these are the guys who are kind of, I would term, the optimists in the room at the time. I mean, here's this is a great graphic somebody made up of the Bitcoin dominoes falling. And Bitcoin, it's been a bloodbath. I mean, Bitcoin was worth, $68,000. Now it's below 20. A lot of the exchanges and everything have gone bankrupt. People have lost everything. There are people who were billionaires a few weeks ago. Some of them now are looking for jobs at McDonald's or Wendy's because they've lost everything. And such is the world that we live in. Now, here's an interesting chart that was in Bloomberg the other day, and it's a chart that shows sort of the forward prices that Europe, this is just, believe me, there are about 100 or more of examples like this that I could give you that just don't make a lot of sense. And so here's one is, okay, forward looking, you sign contracts for things in the future. Then businesses do this to plan. And so I'll share a moment with you of a friend of mine who's a farmer, very large farm, who had some comments when I sent him a small email. I said, hey, look at this and tell me what you think. And I got back a very long text that was like, well, I might have thought I was having a good day, but now I'm not but this person is a good friend. He's been in farming all his life. His dad was a farmer. I'm sure generations before that were farmers. But so here's so what he does sometimes is like when he knows like next year I'll need fertilizer. So they sign contracts to get fertilizer or fuel or that sort of thing delivered this year. But they're paying the price that they agreed upon last year. Now, believe me, the commodity supplier does not like these type of contracts sometimes. If the price goes down, they're happy because they're getting the stuff to supply the farmer with at a much lower price, but the farmer's paying is paying an agreed upon price. But now this year, things have just gone crazy. Well, so in the area of electricity, Germany does these prices, and you can find these charts on the internet. And this is from June 27th. Germany 1 year forward electricity prices have surged to an all-time high. So here's the chart in a little bit clearer form. And this is the article. It's an opinion article of Bloomberg, and this is the title. I mean, this is the kind of stuff I read all day long. Many winters are coming. Start saving energy now. And so what you've seen there is this is the chart since 2008, what people have been paying for electricity that they're going rates they're paying in the future. Look at what happened at the beginning of 2022. It's gone from below 50, whatever the price unit is, to over 200 in a few months. That's 4 times increase. Now, so just factor this in. So how would that impact your budget at home if your electricity bill went up 4 times? What if you were a manufacturer and your plant largely ran on electricity and the input cost of electricity was one of the most important costs that you had, biggest costs that you had, biggest input cost? And so here's what the article says. It says the European manufacturing sector is crumbling under the weight of sustained high electricity and natural gas prices. I'm trying to find but there it is. There we go. Lost my cursor there for a minute. I hate when that happens. I know my wife says, well, where did you put it last? Well, if I knew that, I would have it. Right? The European manufacturing sector is crumbling under the weight of sustained high electricity and natural gas prices. With little prospect of relief, another wave of curtailments and closures looms. And that's before any rationing of natural gas, potentially later this year, in Germany in the event Russia reduces supply even further. In that scenario, many companies will have no choice but to shut down. Well, now, what happens when these manufacturing plants, like, let's say, Germany is a big industrial power. They have auto plants, Mercedes, Porsche, they make cars, Mercedes. What happens when all this shut down? What ripple effect does that have on the economy? And part of this, and so they're saying is, you haven't seen anything yet. Now, European leaders, the article says, should sit down at an emergency summit devoted to the energy crisis. Next month will not be too early. Europe needs a continent-wide campaign to save energy and reduce demand. Start now, don't wait for winter. We're reaching the point, one person said, of no idea is too crazy. Keeping nuclear power plants running, wholesale energy price caps, suspension of markets, removal of CO2 costs and limits, burning more coal, restarting domestic gas production, even if that triggers local earthquakes in the Netherlands. I hear they're having a lot of protests in the Netherlands. They're having protests and riots in Ecuador, Sri Lanka. This stuff is going to, I hate to be the bearer of facts. Absent a miracle, this stuff is spreading everywhere. I don't know how it does not. And I'm going to play you a video of a guy who I consider to be much of an optimist. But first I'm going to play you a video discussing this chart. And I'm just going to kind of jump into it because I didn't have time to edit it out. It's a guy named Chris Martenson. He runs a YouTube channel called Peak Prosperity. He's a very well-reasoned, calm guy, not into what you would call conspiracy theories and that sort of thing. And he had a discussion, and I don't know if this is his partner or wife. I hope it's his wife. And they have a farm up in New England, and they're having a conference here this summer, and they're inviting everybody, or maybe in the fall, come and we'll just sit down and we'll talk about what are we going to do with all this. And you'll see a little bit of the frustration here. So let me jump into, hang on here.
We're traveling.
Oh, traveling was a nightmare.
I was out there presenting and
that was awful.
I was on, right? I was on the whole time.
I know, you were. But I mean, from a travel perspective, it's also a nightmare out there. For anybody that hasn't experienced it recently, it's worse than it's ever been in my lifetime.
Well, hey, oh yeah, Dr. Zelenko. Dr. Zelenko died today.
Oh no.
He'd been battling cancer for a while. I am really sad to hear that. What a hero that guy is. He put it all on the line.
Yeah, he really did, actually.
What a firebrand too. He didn't back down. So yeah, hey, thank you for that comment there. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Zev was a true hero of our times and one of those people who ought to have gotten a Nobel, I believe. I think he was nominated by somebody.
Was he?
Yeah. Yeah, he was a good guy. We exchanged plenty of emails, but we never quite, it sells out, but it's more like a family reunion than a conference. But man, pig is already in the python. That price is there. There are people paying that right now. And even if prices fell sharply tomorrow, they're still going to pay that price in a year because they contracted. That's a forward 1-year contract. So this is how they're seeing those contracts play out in Europe already. That is a panic. Look at this. Look at this.
Crazy.
Look at this chart. This is amazing. The second thing I want you to note is the date on all this. Oh, it's Putin. I will note that Putin invaded right about here. If you can see where my little tiny mouse is, right there, right? Let me get my magic drawing tool out because I love that thing. Right here, February of 2022. If you can see that yellow skirmish right there. Yeah. I would suggest that politely that potentially electricity prices were climbing way before Putin had any designs on Ukraine of any sort. And so this is a disaster that's been a long time in the making. And Putin, to the extent he's being used as an excuse for anything, is really just weak leadership.
Mm-hmm.
Just trying to evade responsibility for something. But that's astonishing. So again, think about the pace of that change, though. If you're a manufacturer, say I'm a producer, you're my downstream customer, and I have people on this side of me too because I'm an intermediary producer, right? So I buy aluminum ingots, I use a lot of electricity, and I fashion them into these things you want.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a contract with these people, I have a contract with you, and all of a sudden my costs go like this. What do? I have to renegotiate with you. I have to say, hey, no offense, but I know we have a contract.
We got a good thing going, but...
And I'd really like you to keep buying my stuff, but I'm going to have to make this a lot more expensive for you, right?
Yeah.
If I have to do that once, it's painful. But you probably do that when it jumped from 50 to 70, because that's like a 40% increase. But when it went 50 to 100, it was a 100% increase.
Right.
But then it went from 100 to 200.
Right. How do you keep up with that?
How do you keep readjusting all of that? It's very difficult to do. And then you have customers on your end. You're like, every time you jack the price up, you're losing them. Right?
Oof. So many businesses.
It's very complex.
So many people are actually going to get hurt by this, I think.
It's got legal complexity. It's got actual market-based complexity. There's things happening.
Well, I think you get the point. And he's a reasonable. This guy's been prepping forever. And he's just like, I sometimes sit here as I'm going through the daily things that pop into my email and on the internet, and I can't wrap my head around all of these different things that are happening all at the same time. And what are we going to do? And he said it's very easy to see that people might hit the panic button. So I'm going to play a clip from Peter Zahn. Now, Peter Zahn, or however you say his name, is a forward-looking guy. He's a geopolitical expert. He looks at big trends. And so I was watching another video of his, and this is the other problem with doing what I do is I start off with one thing, and pretty soon I've got 20 tabs open on my computer. So it's like if you're ADD, if you have trouble paying attention, and it's easy for you to go down rabbit trails, which it kind of is for me, I'll be honest. It's not kind of easy. It's sort of in my DNA. I'll blame my parents. It's in my DNA. But it's hard to get your head around it because there's so many things that are interrelated. So Zahn is an optimist. I mean, he will say things like, look, in the future, 30, 40 years down the road, America's going to be fine. Well, good. I'm 70. Doesn't mean much to me. But then he'll look at things like he talks about the demographics like I do, because I think these play into Bible prophecy quite a bit. And now I don't know if he's a Christian or Bible prophecy guy or not. I'm just saying he's a solid thinking secular guy who I think is worth listening to. His new book is called The End of the World is Just the Beginning. And he says, look, America's going to come back from this, but we've got to do some things to change things. Like, we've got to put capital in to rebuild our industrial base. We shipped everything to China. China's collapsing. He says, China's not going to make it. China went from a third world country to the industrial superpower of the world in 40 years. They have a ton of people, but guess what? They're not having babies. They're all moving to cities and not having babies. They had a one-child policy, which effectively became a no-child policy. Between India and China, soon will have 200 million males more than females. That doesn't really work if you want people to get married unless they go someplace else to try to get the women. Africa's booming. I mean, their population is, their birth rates are skyrocketing. But he says, look, the problem here in America, though, is that we're in the boomers retiring. I'm a boomer. Next year is the midpoint of the boomer retirement wave. The midpoint. And there's 10, 11, 12,000 people retiring every day. Well, when you retire, you don't want to have your capital at risk, so you move it to other investments that are safer, but then that reduces capital availability. And so rebuilding an economic base when everybody's trying to get out of the capital markets it just doesn't work, and it takes time. And America's blessed. I mean, we have this great river system that we have more fertile farmland than any place on the planet. I think I looked it up, 913 million acres of farmland in the United States. Not making more of that, by the way, just sidebar. That amount is pretty static, except maybe they add a little bit to Hawaii every now and then, but you can't farm it for a while because it's too hot. It boils the water. But we have protected on the coast. We have relatively peaceful neighbors to the north and south of us. And, there was a book written many years ago, America, the Inevitable Empire, or something like that. But Zahn says, China, they're running out of labor. And you can't maintain your big industrial output if you're running out of labor. And this is a problem. So this is why I think some of these things we see in Bible prophecy are going to happen more quickly. And the worst country demographically on the planet right now is Iran. And the mullahs, the guys running, the regime there in Iran and Tehran, they know this. And what's one of their main goals? What do they talk about all the time? They want to get rid of one country. Well, really, two countries. And they know their time is short. So when you read in Daniel that the devil goes forth, I think it's in Daniel 12, with great indignation. That means fury or wrath. So there's going to be wrath poured out by the devil during this last period of time. And it says he does this, why? Because he knows his time is short. So when evil empires figure out that their time is short, they're sort of, I think, going to be like, hey, I'm going out, but I'm taking a lot of people with me on the way out. And maybe I can turn it around by doing this. So that's not a very good prospect, but it does fit within the overall structure and picture of Bible prophecy as we look at these things that are going to happen. So here's Peter Zahn, and he's going to talk about, and I have a video that I didn't have time to edit it, about the food crisis, mainly because of the grain that's locked up in Ukraine. And it's shocking. But listen to what Peter Zahn has to say. He's actually doing this video from a conference at Iowa State University And it's like, well, what's he doing in Ames, Iowa? Why would you go to Ames, Iowa if you're a successful author and that type of thing? Well, because if you're talking about agriculture thing, you go to where the people talk about this. So like when I was in law school, I had my one professor always said, listen, if you ever have a case someday, he taught about torts, how you can sue other people if you're wrong. So if you ever have a case involving, animal husbandry, crops, or manure, go call somebody from Purdue, because they get PhDs in manure there at Purdue. And so he goes to, and the guy who used to live across the street from me headed up Ohio State's School of Agriculture for many years till he retired. But so here's Peter Zahn, and listen to what he says.
Hey everyone, Peter Zahn here, coming to you from Iowa State University, where I'm about to go on stage and give a presentation. Now, I know some of you on the coast are like, oh, Ames, Iowa, isn't that like where the agronomics program is? Like, if you even know that? I'm like, yes, it is. Along with Purdue, it is one of the best agri-science programs in the world. And I realize that for some of you, that might be a little, but between the Ukraine war and the breakdown of fertilizer supply chains we're seeing, agriculture is the sector facing the most threat over the course of the next 10 to 20 years, and it will result in multi-continental famines. The folks here in Ames are working on ways to mitigate that however they can. We're looking at malnutrition for a minimum of 500 million people later this year. That will probably triple next year, and it will get significantly worse from there before it gets better, which means that not tech, not cell phones, not manufacturing, not energy, it's agriculture that in the aggregate and in the relative sense is going to be seeing the most explosive growth in the American economy for decades to come. Because if you don't have a car, your life slows down. If you don't have energy, your life gets a little dark. But if you don't have food, that's it, it's over. Food comes first. And we're looking at a period of abject shortages for quite some time. Now, the picture is going to be different if you're talking rice versus wheat versus corn versus soy versus pork versus beef and all the rest, but we're going to see massive reductions in all of them moving forward. Part of it's just the nature of the beast. When we globalized, everyone learned to specialize. It was all about the extra value add. And we didn't have to necessarily worry about growing sufficient food for our own plates. So we got into better things. We moved into manufacturing and services. We moved into the cities. And that meant that agriculture went from the center of everyone's life to the edge, something that became reliable, the more secure and safe that globalization became. But that's now all working in reverse. Countries are going to have to grow their own food. And that means the volume of food that is produced in the world is actually going to go down because we now grow things like wheat on marginal land that could not support agriculture without mass fertilization and irrigation. And those technologies are not possible in a deglobalized system. Okay, that's it on that topic. I'm also happy to report that we made the bestsellers list for the second week run.
Okay, so, and I was looking forward, so I don't remember if you said this, but this year, 500 million people in the world in famine. Next year, that number will add 1.5 billion people to it. It triples next year. And part of that, so I wrote to my friend and I said, I'll just quote from him. He's a very smart guy. He knows farming. Agriculture is in a difficult situation. People expect cheap food, but our cost of production is skyrocketing. Anhydrous ammonia last year was $425 a ton. This year, $1,485 a ton. From $400 to $1,500 a ton. One input. Potash last year was $300 a ton. Now it is $875 a ton, almost tripled. MAP last year, $475 a ton, now $920 a ton. Because of these input prices, every farmer I know has cut back on the amount of each of these applied per acre. Should not see a yield reduction this year, but next year the reduced application rates will be felt in the yield. Equipment prices are through the roof. A fellow farmer priced a new 60-foot soybean planter last week. Cost $750,000. No tractor nor all the support equipment required to operate it. It is his understanding that a guy named Bill Gates is the majority or largest shareholder of a company called John Deere. Rumor is that Warren Buffett owns nearly every statewide John Deere dealership. These together are not a good combination for farmers or consumers. He deals with some big agri companies, and they just are saying food will be scarce as we move forward. I'm being told by my 3 fuel suppliers diesel will be difficult to secure in 8 weeks. Engine oil additives, very scarce. Buy enough now for at least a year. Diesel exhaust fluid, DEF, which is used on newer equipment to keep the air clean, will be very difficult to get by fall because the urea used to make this comes mostly from Russia. Many parts to repair equipment simply are not available. This may well turn into a disaster. Cheap food is going to be a thing of the past. Inputs and equipment just keep going up. Uncharted territory. A very challenging situation. So if you know a farmer, pray for them, because they're facing some very difficult times. And then we run into how many places do you go now? It's easier to count the ones you go to that don't have a help wanted sign. Now, wait a minute. The economy is getting bad. Things are not working. What's going on? And Peter Zahn and others and Chris Martenson make very good points about this, if you think it through. Well, we have boomers, 10, 11,000 retiring a day. We don't have 10 or 11,000 new workers replacing them every day. That's going to lead to a shortage. And in addition to that, because of a certain thing that I refer to as Charlie Vector 019er running around, there were a lot of states, airlines, hospitals, doctors' offices that required people to get a certain state-approved treatment for Charlie Vector 019er. And if you don't, you're fired. Now they're running around saying, we don't have enough people. I mean, I know people who are in the hospital, were in the hospital very sick with Charlie Vector. They're home. They're sending them home that day with a bunch of stuff because they don't have the staff in the hospital to care for them. And so like here, you see this canceled flights. There's a reason for that. It's labor, a large part. They don't have the pilots. A lot of the pilots like, I'm not getting that thing. See ya. I got enough, I get a pension and everything. I'm retiring. Well, you don't just go down to the local vocational school and say, hey, anybody want to fly a jet tomorrow? Takes a lot of training and expensive. So people that I know that know this are saying this is going to go on for years. It's just the way it is. And a lot of these things are flight crews. A lot of these things are, for example, a flight center in Jacksonville, Florida. They've had I forget what the number was, something like 30% of the people who need to run the flight center, FAA flight center, they're working at 30% staff. Well, they can only handle so many planes. And that's kind of a major facility for managing flights in the air. And it just all these things have ripples. So last week I talked about when the wave becomes a tsunami. Now it's like when the little, when you throw a stone into a lake you have the ripple effect. Well, when those little ripples turn into tsunamis, this is the world that we're living in right now. I don't know how else to describe it. Call me negative, but it's the way it is. Now, if the Lord tarries, can it turn around and come back? Yeah, but everybody I talk to is saying it's like, this is 10, 20, 30, 40-year problem. And those are the optimist people, because they think it's going to come back. And so Peter's on, and Peter's on, by the way, he looks at other things in the world. And the one video I was watching, it was about a 43-minute video that he did within the last 2 weeks. He said, there's countries that are poised to explode. One of those countries will be very important in the world going forward is Turkey. Well, wait a minute. I read a Bible, and the Bible seems to indicate that Turkey would be very important going forward. George Friedman, when he was at Stratfor, used to say, watch Turkey. Chuck Missler, when he was alive, that's what he told me. It was probably 15 years ago, 14, 13 years ago now. We're sitting at a dinner at a pastor's house in Glendale, Arizona. And he said, I said, well, did you get excited about stuff? He said, yeah, but I'm watching Turkey. So if you see things happening with Turkey, yeah, then you probably ought to get really excited. Well, I see a lot of things happening with Turkey. I don't have the video. They had the big G7. I don't even have anything on G7. They had the big meeting, NATO, G7, and Erdogan was there. Did you see this video? I will try to do a short midweek update. By the way, on Tuesday at 10 a.m. Eastern, I will be on Q90 FM, Stand Up for the Truth with David Fiorazzo. It's as I always say, it's the fastest hour of my life, because it seems like we just barely get into the conversation and it's over. So I have an hour. So some of the things I haven't talked about today, I'm sure to bring up in that. And we'll flesh out some things that we didn't do today. But listen, so they have this video of Erdogan comes up to Boris Johnson, Prime Minister of the UK, and Johnson is sitting down, and Erdogan puts his hand on his shoulder, and Johnson turns up like he's going to punch him. I'm like, what's up with that? I mean, it was like somebody had sent an electric shock through his body. And he jumped up, and I mean, he was visibly angry. So I don't know the whole story there, but it's sort of like, don't touch me there. Don't touch me like that. You know, it was very bizarre. So canceled flights. You see this, Charlie Vector cases are up this week. You heard the mention of Dr. Zelenko, who passed away. He was 48 years old. He'd had cancer for a number of years. And I think he had surgery this week, and then he coded and they revived him, but they said there was nothing they could do for him. Simone Gold, who's with a doctor's organization. I don't know her. I know people who know her. She's a lawyer and a doctor. And she went to the Capitol last January. And she says they waved her in. She went into the rotunda. She had a megaphone, and she talked about her work with the doctors' organization and what they're doing to help people. She got arrested. The judge that she had was the same one who did that trial of that suspend of the attorney, you know, that got off, that sort of admitted that he lied, but they said, well, it was like no big deal. Because it's no big deal because he lied to the FBI about somebody they don't like. So he got away with it. He sentenced her to 60 days in federal prison for walking into the Capitol Rotunda. She didn't do anything violent. Nobody says anything like that. There's a guy who's running for governor in Michigan. He was in Washington, D.C., near the Capitol, and he got arrested this week. He was the leading Republican candidate for governor. They've weaponized everything. Not too much to say about this. This is something else that's going on. This is China, the surveillance state. They now estimate that worldwide there are over 1 billion cameras watching you when you're out doing something. And that over half of them are in China alone. And so this is from the New York Times. So listen, no, we can all hate the New York Times. sometimes they actually do stuff that's like good journalism. There's like some remnants of people there that actually do this, and they have a great article this week, and then they have an accompanying video about they went and they looked at these bidding documents for setting up surveillance state things in China, collecting data, iris collection, collecting DNA from men and putting it into a database. And they say it's to manage and control people, a comprehensive collection. And so they show how the cameras are to be set up and that type of thing. And then they have some pictures here of how the cameras are set up around, and you'll see this, like this is Tiananmen Square, this is around the seat of government of China. And they show how they collect data on people. I've talked a little bit about this, like, some people wanted to go to a protest in another smaller town because of some banking issues. And they went to the place and they took the train there. They come out of the station, and to come out of the station, you have to show your health care app, which says, whether it's green, if it's green, you can go. Well, all of theirs had turned red on the train because they were going to a protest. And they artificial intelligence and people did it, so they flipped the switch and they could not do anything. So, so they're, social credit scores and that type of thing. So this is what's leading to a lot of the fuel problems is before the war in Ukraine, there was a problem. And part of that is this ESG, environmental, social, and governance, which is a social credit score for corporations, pushed in large part by Davos, the World Economic Forum, the Saudis through their Future Innovation Investment Institute, and Russia funds a lot of these groups that oppose further exploration of everything. So now we've shut down the supply and prices going up. It's sort of a basic rule of economics. But look at these places around China. Look at these cameras and everything. And they're doing facial recognition. They're collecting information and that sort of thing. So that's troubling. Now I want to skip over to I have about a bazillion things. So I want to talk a little bit about the Supreme Court because, the U.S. Supreme Court is a pretty important court in the United States. Hang on a second here. Unless I deleted all my slides on that, would that be a blessing? Don't get your hopes up. Oh, here they are. So this is great. Whoops, better put my slideshow up. So Ruth Marcus, in I think the Washington Post, has an editorial. The term the Supreme Court raced over the speed bumps. And so they have a big thing here of all the different cases, like there was a climate change case reining in the EPA, which is a good thing. And as one, let's see, I think this is the case here. That's the Second Amendment case. Here it is. So the Supreme Court makes it even harder to stop climate change. So now, of course, everybody, that's the received wisdom of the intelligentsia in the world, that we're in the midst of this climate change and it's all man-made. And some of it might be man-made, but I'm sort of like, I think more people die from exposure to cold than heat in a lot of cases. And part of it might be the sun's going through kind of a weird phase of activity. And some people think we're on the verge, not of a warming age, but of a new ice age or a mini ice age, which means there'll be reduced sunlight, which means that maybe those northern climates where they grow things aren't going to be able to grow food as much. So it's like the perfect storm. Somebody might say it's the perfect prophetic storm. And so here, it says here, the EPA ruling, essentially what they said is the EPA just can't make all these rules. They have to be authorized by Congress. It was a 6-3 decision along ideological lines, but now everybody's going, that seems like, and even the New York Times picks this up, the EPA ruling goes beyond coal regulation. It is a warning shot across the bow of the administrative state. And I would say, yeah, I hope it is. Because a lot of these rules, they've shut down all these coal-burning power plants. They've not replaced them. And then if they replace them with solar and wind, they fudge the data. Like in Germany, when they're analyzing the impact of solar, Germany's cloudy a lot of the time, like Ohio. Solar doesn't work all the time, or it doesn't work that well. So what do? When they analyze the data about how much solar is being generated, they take like the 6 sunniest days in August and use that as the baseline for all 365 days. It's a scam. It's just, solar's great, but guess what? The parts and minerals that are needed to make it, it's all being done in China. China's not our friend. Go listen to Frank Gaffney at the Committee for the Present Danger China and some of the presentations that he's giving through the Center for Security Policy. It's frightening. And then there's the EPA's. This is an editorial from the Wall Street Journal, the EPA's supply chain disruption. This is written by the president and CEO of Worthington Industries. You see it down there on 270. I had been playing golf at the club started by the founder of Worthington Industries last week, and they were having a board meeting. And I'm pretty sure this guy was in the clubhouse when I went in to eat lunch. What he's saying is the EPA is putting these rules in, and we can't do this. They make more cylinders, refillable cylinders, than any other company on the planet. And now the EPA is putting rules on them. This was written, I think, before the decision came out this week. And Mr. Rose says, listen, we're going to have to lay off people. And it's a successful company. Big deal here locally. So that was in the Wall Street Journal just the other day. So that's one. So now another good case was the Second Amendment case. And on the Second Amendment, again, a 6-3 along conservative ideological lines, New York had a rule about concealed carry. It essentially made it impossible to get a concealed carry. You could be a cop under threat from underworld mafiosos, and you probably would not qualify to get a concealed carry to have a weapon on you to protect yourself. So the Supreme Court came and said, you can't do that. Second Amendment, it's important. Great decision. Looked at the foundations of American law. And it made Alan Dershowitz upset. He said it's an unconstitutional ruling. The Constitutional Court made a decision about the Constitution, but it's unconstitutional. So it's always kind of fun to watch these little meltdowns and tantrums that they throw. And so what did New York do? They enacted a law this week, made it through the House and the Senate in New York and signed into law by the governor. Essentially says, well, a concealed carry, certain public spaces are exempted. And when you read through the list, it's like every place in New York is a public space. So what are they doing? What do we have? We have lawless people in charge. When the highest court in the land says you cannot do this, they say, we don't care. We're doing it anyway. Do something. This is unbelievable. You'll see some more in just a minute. So here's the legislation that they enacted. And there's some provisions in here that are kind of interesting about what you have to supply. You have to supply to get a concealed carry in a public space. So you have the restriction of public spaces. Now you have to get a concealed carry. You have to provide them with information in the application process. And I filled out an application for one of these things years ago, but it wasn't anything like this. names and contact information for the applicant's current spouse or domestic partner, any other adults residing in the applicant's home, including any adult children of the applicant, and whether or not there are minors residing, full or part-time, in the applicant's home. Names and contact information of no less than 4 character references who can attest to the applicant's good moral character. Hey, why don't we apply this? If you're going to run for office, we want 4 people to attest to your moral character. How many of these thieves that we have running things would qualify under? In other words, rules for thee, but not for me. So I don't care for a lot of these people. And I'm just getting worked up on my, you know how the forward-looking electric prices chart? Okay, I'm right here, and we're ending up here after I'm done today. Who can attest to the applicant's good moral character and that such applicant has not engaged in any acts or made any statements that suggest they are likely to engage in conduct that would result in harm to themselves or others. And then here's another provision. A list of former and current social media accounts of the applicant from the past 3 years to confirm the information regarding the applicant's character and conduct as required. And they have a new law in Canada. It's called C11. It's passed one of the houses of Parliament. I think one of the sections of Parliament. It's probably going to become law. It's going to regulate the internet by that fascist Justin Trudeau. And here in California, of course, they take great care to protect all of our information, you know. So here's what happened. California has a database. In that database is everybody who has a concealed carry permit in California, where it's also hard to get a concealed carry permit. And guess what happened this week? Well, whoever was in charge did not protect the database, and the database was compromised and exposed to the public for a while. I think they've taken it down now, but sort of like, the horse is already halfway to China. And it exposed like home addresses and information of like 244 judges in California. And there are some good judges in California. Pastors, teachers, other people that have concealed carries. And just wait, you're going to have school systems say, Mr. Stevens, you have been a wonderful teacher for our children for the last 30 years. But we saw this data, we didn't know you had a concealed carry permit. And we don't know if you ever brought it to school, but we're going to assume the worst. And we see that you belong to some of these Second Amendment groups on Facebook. You're fired. And what they've done is this is how they weaponize everything, just like they're weaponizing the FBI. And we'll see about that in a minute. So the other decision, of course, we talked a little bit about last week was the Dobbs decision overturning Roe. And New York Times and others reported as a 6-3 decision. It's really a 5-4 decision with this sort of grayscale mass person in the middle that's known as the Chief Justice that doesn't really hand for anything. And it's had a lot of reactions. Like I said this, showed this last week from the Edmonton Sun, back to the dark ages. I'm supposed to speak in Alberta next year, but who knows if I'll be even able to get across the border because it's bad. So here's Katie Porter. She's a Democratic representative from California. Here was her reaction to the decision overturning Roe.
President Biden has said that inflation is the #1 priority for the Biden White House to try to get under control right now. As you're out there in California talking to constituents during this re-election year for Congress, how does inflation compare to this newly important in the sense of the Supreme Court decision pending abortion issue. How do those two issues compare?
Well, I don't think they compare. I think they actually reinforce each other. So the fact that things like inflation can happen and it can become more expensive to feed your kids and to fuel your car is exactly why people need to be able to be in charge of how many mouths they're going to have to feed. So I think the fact that we're seeing this jump in expenses, that we're seeing people having to pay more in the grocery store.
Okay, she's a lunatic. Do you understand what she's saying? And I saw videos like this all over. We ought to be, like, I have a kid who's disabled, and it would have been better if he'd never been born. With the kid standing there. Their relatives, hey, I'm on MSNBC tonight, go watch. And they're saying, like, you have a disability, it would have been better if I'd aborted you, or somebody had aborted you. That's what she's saying there, is she not? Okay, so I'm working up the scale here. I'm just about ready to go vertical. This is from Splintered, A Court and Country in Crisis. This is from the Times of London. Here's another one. America braced for turmoil as Biden puts abortion fury on. The New York Times, a dangerous new era. The Supreme Court's abortion ruling is radical and wrong. America's post-Roe, Michelle Goldberg, who's one of the I hope they keep these people cordoned off from the rest of the people at the New York Times and the newsroom there. Going to criminalize abortion. This is an interesting article. This is also from the New York Times. So the 14th Amendment should protect fetal life. And there's a good case you can make that the right to life and liberty is enshrined in the 14th Amendment. And we don't really need to be talking about abortion because that amendment protects everybody. And some in the pro-life community are doing this, and they have a big article after abortion ruling, a push for punishment, and they cite Apologia Church out in Jeff Durbin is the pastor there out in Arizona. I think it's in Tempe or Mesa, Arizona. They're saying we ought to just do away with abortion. Now they're also saying confrontation over First Amendment, Beiluvement, post-Roe fight. And so now even the people on the left are saying, well, now we're going to have these restrictions put on what you can and can't say about abortion. Well, that's just, we can't have that. Now we can put restrictions on what people say about Charlie Vector or about the transgender issue. That's okay because, we have the right view on that. Now the people with the wrong views seem to have the upper hand in some states. And here, this was part of the same article I read on the Second Amendment. New York aims to enshrine right to seek an abortion. Come out with that immediately. MSNBC, that I thought it was just a great graphic that they had about, the abortion. Congress has let the Supreme Court run amok. Why didn't Congress do anything? Well, maybe they're not allowed to enact laws in this particular area because of what the Constitution says. Constitution is a limiting document to protect the people, not for you guys to twist it into all this other stuff. Look at this other comment. The Supreme Court ended its term Thursday, having produced a string of decisions that with casual brutality threaten Americans' privacy, health, and well-being. Democrats, in the face of this assault on the rights and privileges of their constituents, haven't responded with the necessary anger or urgency. Then another article, same vein, what to do about a Supreme Court on a reactionary rampage. A radicalized Supreme Court majority is changing the nation. Here's this one. It says same-sex marriage may be next. Here's another one. If Clarence Thomas were consistent, he'd oppose Loving versus Virginia. So what happened? So Clarence Thomas, in his concurring opinion, said, this thing comes from this thing called substantive due process, which we kind of made up, and it's kind of a catch-all. So we throw all things in here. We throw contraception in, same-sex marriage, abortion. It's time that we look at all this. And one of the cases was Loving versus Virginia, which prohibited, Virginia had a statute that prohibited interracial marriage. And so everybody's running around today saying, Clarence Thomas, he's such a hypocrite because he's married to a white woman. Okay? But would he say Loving versus Virginia should be overturned? Yeah. What happens if it's overturned? It goes back to the states, and the states get to decide. Now, do you think in today's age, I don't know anybody, I mean, if there are people who are against interracial marriage, but if they're there, they're a very small percent. They're not going to pass a law banning interracial marriage today. And Thomas would say, yeah, let the states go decide. I trust the people of Virginia and all the other states to make the right decision. And he would be right. So let's see here. Well, in case I forget to say this committee that's running, anybody watching this nonsense about what happened? They're out there, they're arresting everybody. John Eastman, who was one of the president's attorneys, got arrested in a parking lot. I don't know where he was, Colorado, I think. And they wouldn't even show him the warrant. I don't even think they gave him a copy of it after they read it to him. You can't do this. They've weaponized the FBI against their political opponents. This would make the Stalinists proud in Russia. We have been taken over. I'm just telling you the facts. Here's Secretary Xavier Becerra. Today's decision is unconscionable. Abortion is a basic and essential part of healthcare. If you're not the baby. I saw a doctor, I think it's an old video, he was testifying in front of Congress. He said, well, you stick this in here and you rip the leg off and you pull it out. And then you go up there and if you can't get your forceps closed, you know you've got the skull. And you drag this thing out of this mother piece by piece. And then you assemble the parts to make sure you got it all. What kind of cruelty is this? And I'll talk about transgender in just a moment. And so in case I forget it, because I thought it was a good point that I thought of, I had these fleeting moments where I had a really good thought about something yesterday. What was it? So now I remember it. See, what was it? No. On transgender, I'm going to play you a clip of a young girl who went through a transitioning process. She's 17 now. She went through this when she was 15 years old. And the question is, how can somebody be so cruel as to chop off the breasts of a 15-year-old girl? And the answer is, the people who can rip a kid out of the womb piece by piece by piece. What Hippocratic oath? It's the hypocrite oath. Do no harm. So here's Becerra, today's decision is unconscionable. Here he was this is the day after the decision, speaking at the Aspen Institute out in Colorado, talking about abortion and what they plan to do.
People don't normally ask a secretary how you felt, but I really would like to know. I mean, you were expecting this, and yet I'm sure it took the wind out of you.
Well, I say this knowing that my high-risk OBGYN wife for several decades, who deals with this every day, has given me the real-life way of looking at this, that to me the biggest heartbreak is having a Supreme Court that we can no longer trust. That, to me, I think
applause
this
on
last
the video,
week tells
folks,
you where
not
the
from
Supreme Court is
Fellowship
taking
Bible
us.
Chapel.
They have said to states, you can regulate a woman's body, but you not so much guns and assault weapons, and not so much religion in schools. And so if that's the direction the Supreme Court, which is supposed to be a non-political body, is taking this country, our democracy is in real trouble.
Yesterday, President Biden called it a sad day for the court and the country, and he said, quote, the health and life of women in this nation are now at risk. What are you doing concretely in response to the court's decision to try to help women?
Well, we're working with centers like Planned Parenthood, so we are restoring funding for Title X, family planning services. We are working with supporters on the ground to make sure that we are providing services to women where we can. We are looking into everything, including assisting in transportation, something that HHS doesn't typically do.
Can you do that legally?
Talk to me later.
I mean, that's a big question, right?
I always tell my team at HHS, if you've done your homework, then we have no right to do mild. And so we're going to be aggressive and go all the way. And I would tell you if you're recording, so I won't tell you. So
this is all on the record, Mr. Secretary.
We are looking at every option, and among those is transportation.
Say that again?
We are looking at every option, and among those is transportation.
Transporting women to other states. What about the so-called abortion pill, which is FDA approved? The president said that you're making efforts to try to make sure women can get that, even in states where abortion will now be illegal.
Medication abortion is available. It's been around for a couple of decades. Contraception was not overturned by the Supreme Court.
Okay, you get the point there. He's going to be aggressive. We're going to go against the Supreme Court wherever we can. Almost sounds like an insurrection. And they questioned the Supreme Court. This is a mashup clip. This is from Tucker Carlson. I try not to play Tucker Carlson clips, but I have two this morning because I just thought this one was pretty good on the abortion issue. Here is so the decision comes down, and the next day, everybody's talking about why they don't like the decision and what they think of the Supreme Court. Listen to this. This is kind of funny. Well, sad funny.
Let's be clear. We have so many problems with the Supreme Court and the legitimacy.
This court has lost legitimacy. They have burned whatever legitimacy they may still have had.
This is a crisis of legitimacy.
And that threatens the court's long-term legitimacy.
The court is about to face one of the largest threats to perceived legitimacy ever in its history.
The Supreme Court has lost legitimacy with the American people.
The crisis of the very legitimacy of the United States Supreme Court fills me with sorrow.
Well, you got to give them credit for all being on the same page as usual. We'd love to get the conference code to the morning call where they set that up. But because the court did something they don't like, they're not telling us the third branch of government is, quote, illegitimate. The Supreme Court is illegitimate because it's allowing voters to decide what they want to do with abortion. Some will call that democracy, a system in which citizens choose their own form of government. They're telling us it's illegitimate.
And where did they get that? Well, here's another place where they might have got it. Now, listen, I tried to edit out words. These are people around the Supreme Court when the decision came down. So please, if there are bad words there, I'm only reporting the news. I don't endorse this type of language, but it is what it is.
We're still here.
Okay, so a lot to be said. Here's a congresswoman who's participating in the discussion there at the Supreme Court.
Illegitimate! Illegitimate! Illegitimate!
Okay, so you get the point. So here is Morning Mika. I want to play this. It's Joe and Mika. You know, they're married now, and Scarborough still claims to be sort of conservative, or it's. They deserve each other, but listen to this.
Good morning and welcome to Morning Joe. It's Monday, June 27th. Mika, you have been on the phone all weekend, as have I, from people calling. Obviously, a lot of grave concerns, and I must say grave concerns even among those who are pro-life and have been pro-life. throughout their own lives,
That's a
concerned
lie.
about the fact that you have young women, victims of rape, victims of incest, that because of this ruling in many states are going to be forced to carry the rapist child to term. That's just the reality, and that's what we keep hearing.
Yeah, and more is coming. I've been hearing from women all over the country and even around the world. This is devastating. And they asked me what we can do, and I've got 2 words: please vote. It was Winston Churchill who said that democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others that have been tried. And the same might be said of the Democratic Party at this point. Democrats somehow manage to get the most votes and lose the most elections, so they need more. Even when they win, they lose. It could be argued that today's Democrats are too weak, too fragile, too woke, too elitist, too disconnected from the realities of working Americans, and yet the Democratic Party is the world's last best hope against fascism, against an extreme, autocratic, anti-woman, anti-gay, anti-contraception, anti-freedom collection of fascists who dominate the Trump wing of today's Republican Party. A group of fascists who even refuse to investigate the violent riots that their president launched on January 6th to overthrow a legitimately elected president. Why? Because they are fascists. And now they're claiming control over your bodies, your health, your life. And they've promised they're coming next to take away your birth control pills and even what you do with another consenting adult in the privacy of your own bedroom. To call Trump's Republican Party and Trump's Supreme Court extreme understates the danger these institutions pose to American freedom, to our democracy. They are fascists.
Okay. I think I got what she's saying. So, listen, Hillary Clinton alert. She had a comment about Clarence Thomas. Now, I want to ask you, listen to what she says, and ask you if I or anyone else had said that about a black person that was a leftist, what would happen? You know what would happen, banned from social media. Listen to what she says. This is on CBS Morning News, I think.
Good morning and welcome to Morning Joe.
Former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton says the Supreme Court's monumental abortion ruling could lead to other decisions turning back the clock on civil rights. In her first on-camera interview about the ruling, we asked her about Justice Clarence Thomas's written opinion. He said that the court should reconsider past rulings on contraception and same-sex marriage. Justice Thomas has sort of floated that out there about contraceptive rights, contraception, and about same-sex marriages, but other justices have pushed back to say, no, he's really sort of on his own with that.
Well,
Don't believe that?
Well, he may be on his own, but he's signaling, as he often did. You know, I went to law school with him. Mm-hmm. He's been a person of grievance for as long as I've known him. Resentment, grievance, anger. And he has signaled in the past to lower courts, to state legislatures, find cases, pass laws, get them up. I may not win the first, the second, or the third time, but we're going to keep at it.
So you're saying people pay attention to
this? The people he is speaking to, which are the, right-wing, very conservative judges and justices and state legislatures. And the thing that there's so many things about it that are deeply distressing, but women are going to die, Gail. Women will die.
So, first of all, she may have gone to law school with him, but law schools are fairly large, and you get a small group. He's a person of anger and grievance, said the patron saint of anger and grievance in the world. It's unbelievable. Pam will remember that. Well, she didn't go with me that day. I went over to the British Library when we were in London a few years ago. It's a phenomenal place. So they have a big, giant room where they have all of these great works of literature and writing. sitting there to look at. I mean, over here is the Magna Carta, two of the original copies of the Magna Carta, a great document that I think helped lead to human freedom. Here is original King James version of the Bible, original copies of the Canterbury Tales, great works of literature. And then there were two special, like right across the aisle were two. There was one that was the papers of one of the Beatles and some of the notebooks and things of his. And then next to them was the collection of original papers of Michael Palin of Monty Python. And I thought, so King James Bible, Canterbury Tales, Magna Carta, Monty Python. And I thought, that's kind of juxtaposition, but those guys were great at satire. They wouldn't have written something like this, of what Hillary Clinton said about Clarence Thomas. Because satire has to have sort of a ring of truth to it. They wouldn't believe that anybody could do this. And now I'm thinking, like, the people who are running the British Library, they're geniuses for putting all that stuff together because it is all connected. Like that 3D music score that I showed at the beginning. So here's a little bit more from Tucker Carlson. I'll have a few more comments about this. I'm going to do this in the science thing because I think it's when I get to follow the science. But here's what Tucker said, like, maybe this is what's really going on. Now, I mentioned this last Sunday. It seems like all the corporations are jumping on board supporting abortion. They're going to pay for people to go. So Tucker talks about it and says, so maybe Tucker's thought, hey, that Haller guy was right. And I doubt that he did that. But I did talk about it last Sunday. And, if he wants to send me a commission check, we can make those arrangements. Preferably do it by wire. But I'm just joking. But here's what he said. I think this is very appropriate.
But what are we seeing here? It's not simply an attack, an explicit attack on the legitimacy of the third branch of government, the court. It's not just an attack on the right of people to govern themselves. It's something bigger than that. What you're seeing is a coordinated attack on the family and on children. People at these protests are angered at the idea that children are being born. Watch what's happening there. That is hardly an overstatement. Here's a photograph on your screen from this weekend. It was taken outside the Supreme Court. It shows a mother humiliating her children in public, implying they are a burden to her because they are still living. We saw things like this everywhere at pro-abortion protests, often in full view of children. What about the thought of having children makes these people so angry? Where does an attitude like that come from? Well, as it turns out, that attitude comes from the same place the Democratic Party now gets all of its attitudes, directly from corporate America. Corporate America wants you childless, and this is a big change. 100 years ago, big companies built housing for the families of their employees and then schools and libraries to educate them. It was the humane thing to do, but it also seemed to make good business sense at the time. If you wanted workers you could count on, you had to take care of them and their offspring. But over time, that arrangement got expensive. Employees with families demanded higher wages to support their children, and in many cases, they formed unions to get those raises. So labor costs soared. So corporate America, in response to this, developed a new model: hire single women. At many big companies, including in the traditionally male banking sector, young women now make up the majority of new employees, and you can see why they do. They work hard, they're reliable, they tend to be loyal to the companies they work for. The one downside to hiring young women is they can get pregnant. If you're running the HR department at Citibank, that is the last thing you want. Children make your healthcare plan more expensive. Worse than that, they tend to compete with an employee's attention. Responding to after-work emails seems less pressing to most new moms than putting their own kids to bed. That's a huge problem for big companies, so they have every incentive to prevent their workers from having children. They can't say that out loud, of course, it'd be too obvious. Give us the best years of your life, and in exchange, we'll pay you what's effectively a subsistence wage in whatever overpriced urban hellscape we're based in, and then take from you the one thing that might give your existence meaning and joy in middle age, which is having children. That's the deal we're offering. That is the deal they're offering, but they can't say that. It would sound like what it is, which is exploitation. No better than what the cotton mills once did to 14-year-old girls. So instead of saying that, which is the truth, corporate America uses the language of the social movement it created, feminism, to spin the entire arrangement as some sort of progressive liberation movement. Fight the patriarchy, have an abortion. It's got nothing to do with lowering our labor costs, we promise. But of course it does have everything to do with lowering their labor costs. Across the country, they are making that case, abortion as liberation. Many of the biggest American companies are now paying female employees to have abortions, to end their pregnancies. That would include Microsoft and Apple, Facebook, Yelp, Netflix, Comcast, Goldman Sachs, Citibank, JP Morgan, Nike, Starbucks, et cetera, et cetera. Dick's Sporting Goods is offering female employees up to $4,000 if they get an abortion. Does the company offer the same amount to female employees who want to have children? Well, the editors at Breitbart wondered that. They asked Dick's Sporting Goods that question, but the company didn't even respond. And that tells you the answer. What's amazing is that in the face of this, so many Americans who ought to know better have fallen for it. So some accountant at a soulless publicly traded corporation concludes that drones with no personal lives make cheaper workers. That's what happened. But rather than question this or resist it, your average college-educated NPR listener nods in vigorous bovine agreement and then becomes completely hysterical when someone suggests that maybe there's another way to live, that it's at least theoretically possible that raising your own children might be more rewarding as a life choice than commuting into a slum on public transportation in order to claw your way up to middle management at Deutsche Bank. But the very thought of that, of turning down Deutsche Bank to bring new life into the world, drives these people into a frenzy of rage. Choosing a family over service to global capitalism? That's disgusting. Shut up. Journalist Drew Hernandez ran into people like this over the weekend. Here's how it went.
For white people, why don't you protect me? No, let's not have a conversation. Worthless little sack of.
I guess the pandemic's over. What's wrong, sir? You like killing babies? You love killing babies?
I love killing babies.
I love killing babies. That's demonic. I'm being kind by saying that. So here's a list of a bunch of the corporations. Kroger, somebody sent me a thing that Kroger's doing this. This is from the London Times this morning. Angry, divided, and mistrustful. Is this how America ends? Two nations divisible with anger and sense of injustice for all. Britain is next to declare clinic protesters after anti-abortion victory in America. I pray so. I pray so. They even have an article in the New York Times this morning, the young women who fight abortion rights. And they always want to say, follow the science, right? Well, that was the problem. Do you know back in, I heard it on David Fiorazo this week. I could not find the audio clip this morning, but maybe David can dig it out for our talk on Tuesday, as if we don't have anything else to talk about. But he read from the transcript of the Roe versus Wade argument. And they were talking about when life begins. And the one justice, I think it was Justice Byron White, who I think was in the minority on Roe, it was a 7-2 decision. He said, counsel, this is Sarah Weddington, who was representing the person who supposedly wanted an abortion, but who really didn't need an abortion. It was all fake. And he said, if life starts, if this is a life, you've got a big problem with what you're trying to push. So praise the Lord for somebody like Byron Whizzer White, who played football in the early helmet days, but apparently didn't get enough concussions to stop him from reasoning truthfully and biblically about life. And I don't have time to get into today. A friend in Jerusalem sent me a Jewish perspective on this. You know, a lot of Jewish people are just pro-abortion in today's society, but it came from a rabbi, and he said, "That's not what we've been teaching for, you know, a few thousand years out of the thing called the Bible." So I'll go through that, and maybe we can have a separate talk about this. But now, let's do this transgender. I have two things to do, and I'll try to make them quick. I will do a midweek this week, and also you can listen to David Fiorazo, Q90fm.com, live at 10 a.m. on Tuesday at Q90fm.com. 10 a.m. Eastern time, yeah. Like to me, Eastern time should be like Greenwich Mean Time. This is like all the world should operate on American Eastern time, because that's where I live. And but so here's transgender. This issue is so, you know, we talk about convergence in Bible prophecy. This is where so many different things converge as to the evil that's being foisted on America. First, let's start off with Admiral, what's his name, the Assistant Secretary of Health and Human Services, talking about this because, you know, it's Pride Month, and so he has to get his shots in. Let's see if it comes.
Gender-affirming care is life-saving, medically necessary, age-appropriate, and a critical tool for healthcare providers. As a pediatrician, when it comes to making sure kids are healthy and happy, I know how important care that affirmed someone's true identity can be.
You know, Lot was vexed by the stuff going on around him. If this doesn't bother you, you need to check whether you're really in the faith. I mean, I hate to say that, but I'm just saying. So here is, one of the Presbyterian, I think PC USA came out with a bunch of nonsense this week. It's hard to keep up with the nonsense that's coming out of churches now. So here, but this is from the London Times yesterday or today. Sex-positive education is harming children. So Janice Turner, praise the Lord, she came, I don't know if she's a Christian or not, but she's right. This is harming children. How can we do this to children? You can do it to children if you can rip them limb from limb, skull crushed and pulled out in an abortion. If you've lost your humanity that much, this stuff is a piece of cake. This is just the next step down the road. We talk about slippery slopes, and everybody says, oh, that's a slippery slope. Well, it is a slippery slope because it is a slippery slope. But even the New York Times Magazine a couple weeks ago had this, the battle over gender therapy. More teenagers than ever are seeking transitions, but the medical community that treats them is deeply divided about why and what to do to help it. So look, yeah, it is deeply divided because one's following the science and the other is following feelings. And this had its manifestation in the emergent church, which was truth is determined by my feelings. If I feel it's true, it's true. This is a guy named Paul McHugh. He's retired now, about 5 years from Johns Hopkins. He was a psychiatrist, and this is a New York Times article, or Washington Post article from 5 years ago. Long shadow cast by psychiatrists on transgender issues finally recedes at Johns Hopkins. So do you think this article is complimentary of Dr. McHugh? He was a psychiatrist. Johns Hopkins was the first hospital in the United States to do sex reassignment surgery. Because of the work of this brave man, he's 5'6". He said he wished he would have been taller. He might have been able to be more influential. But because of him, they stopped doing these back in the 70s. Because you know what they were finding? They were looking at and Abigail Shrier did a great article on him a few years ago in the Wall Street Journal, standing against psychiatry's crazes. And he's a psychiatrist. But he was following the science. And what he was finding was people who went through the gender transition surgery were not 2 times more likely to commit suicide, or even 5, or even 10. The research showed they were 19 times more likely to commit suicide. So now what did they tell you? We need to do this surgery because they might commit suicide, says the people who supposedly care for these people. This is sickness. This is demonic, evil sickness. So California now has legislation, SB 107. And what they want to do is they want to make California a sanctuary state, so that if you can't get transgender sex reassignment surgery someplace else, you can come to California and we will do it for you. And, they have these conversion therapy bans they're trying to put in. You cannot talk to somebody about their sexual orientation because that's fixed at birth. That's set in stone, chiseled in stone as to what their sexual orientation is. And you can't talk to anybody to change it. And if the Bible says something, well, it's just a book of myths and nonsense. Even though people do, right? But if you're born male or female, we can change that. And we've got a lot of experience ripping legs off of babies in mother's womb. So your breasts, piece of cake. Your male genitalia, where's my knife? I hope I'm being crude enough to make the point today as to how sick I think this stuff is. So yeah, I'm getting up here on that chart. I'm gone vertical a while ago because this really upsets me. In this article with Abigail Shrier, she starts off with this. You might have heard this joke. A man gets a call from his wife. Honey, be careful. A car is going the wrong way on the freeway. And he responds, oh, it's not just one car, it's hundreds of them. If it were a psychiatrist joke, Paul McHugh could be that driver. And she goes on, very wonderful article she wrote about him in the Wall Street Journal back in 2019, standing against psychiatry's crazes. So here's a hearing, and I have one more thing I'll do just real quick after this. Real quickly. I'll try to get it done. Senate Bill 107. Have I gone over my time yet? Remember, I'm Greenwich Mean Time. So Senate Bill 107 had a hearing this week. And a 17-year-old young lady, I think her name was Chloe, came in and talked about transition surgery. This is only 2 minutes long. I want you to listen to what she says and what all of the adults around her did not do and what happened to her. This is in the California legislature testimony within the last couple of weeks. I got this from Breitbart.
My name is Chloe Cole, and I am a 17-year-old detransitioner from the Central Valley. I was medically transitioned from ages 13 to 16. My parents took me to a therapist who affirmed my male identity, and the therapist did not care about causality or encourage me to learn to be comfortable in my body. He brushed off my parents' concerns about the efficacy of hormones, puberty blockers, and surgeries. My parents were given the threat of suicide as a reason to move me forward in my transition. My endocrinologist, after 2 to 3 appointments, put me on puberty blockers and injectable testosterone. At age 15, I asked to remove my breasts. My therapist continued to affirm my transition. I attended a top surgery class that was filled with around 12 girls that thought they were men. Most were my age or younger. None of us were going to be men. We were fleeing from the uncomfortable feeling of becoming women. I was unknowingly physically cutting off my true self from my body, irreversibly and painfully. Our trans identities were not questioned. I went through with surgery. Despite having therapists and attending the top surgery class, I really didn't understand all of the ramifications of any of the medical decisions I was making. I wasn't capable of understanding, and it was downplayed consistently. My parents, on the other hand, were pressured to continue my so-called gender journey with a suicide threat. I will never be able to breastfeed a child. I have blood clots in my urine. I am unable to fully empty my bladder. I do not yet know if I am capable of carrying a child to full term. In fact, even the doctors who put me on puberty blockers and testosterone do not know. SB 107 is circumventing states' laws that have needed safeguards in place so my story is not repeated. Children cannot consent. Vote no on SB 107.
Thank you. We'll now go to the hearing room for witnesses and opposition.
So here's just a couple kind of related items. So this is a meeting that took place in Turkmenistan this week, the capital of Turkmenistan. And it's the countries that Azerbaijan, Iran, Turkmenistan, and Kazakhstan, I think, and Russia that border the Caspian Sea. And understand that this dispute with Russia is creating this different world order. Everything's been shaken up. But some of it, I think, plays into Bible prophecy. So here we see this organization coming together. This is a big deal because it ties into Iran, it ties into Turkey, and all these end-time alliances that we see them forming. And here's Putin. And, there's a video of him getting off the plane and
Da una
making the
parte la fame di
speech
energia
and,
e le sanzioni,
hang on a second
dall'altra
here.
l'isolamento e la
Getting off the plane. And, we hear all this stuff. He's dying. He can't get around. He has this. He has that. And I have to be honest with you. I'm just not buying it. I think it's propaganda. And there's a lot of propaganda on both sides. So you see the countries there around the Caspian Sea, which is a very oil-rich region. And of course, I don't know if they had these shipped in from the Kremlin, the Putin long table. I mean, we could probably sort of give it that, these giant long tables that he seems to be sitting at one end of when everybody else is at the other end. Not the most intimate setting, but Caspian Sea is a big body of water, so I guess they were trying to symbolize that. So here's the leaders of that, and and Putin's there. He's shaking hands, walking around, and this is a big deal. There's some things that they want to do about that, and he gave a speech just like he was doing 3 hours someplace else. So now, Caroline Glick tweeted this about this meeting. So we have the Shanghai Cooperative Organization, which is Iran and China and Russia and about 17 countries. And we have the BRICS, B-R-I-C-S, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and I forget what the S is, Spain, maybe. They're getting together. And she said, this is a geopolitical earthquake. I agree 100% with what she said. The Saudis are considering joining the BRICS. There are two ways to look at this. Both can be right. The Saudis want to humiliate Biden ahead of his visit, going there to beg for oil. And this is the end of the petrodollar. And we see this ramping up of things between Israel and Iran. One of these things came to the fruition. Now, in the Jerusalem Post magazine this week, they talk about multidimensional warfare. I have talked about this document a number of times. This came out about a year ago from the Institute for National Strategic Studies in Tel Aviv. The next war in the north, they're talking about this and all the things. You can download this, you can read it. It will really help you understand all of the things that the Israeli Defense Force and the Israeli Air Force and the people who are in charge of the government in Israel, whoever that might be from week to week, seems to change. They're going, the government fell this week, so they've appointed Yair Lapid, who didn't even graduate from high school. I mean, that's just a fact. And was a TV presenter for a while. Now he's the prime minister for at least till November 1st elections, the prime minister of Israel. Somebody joked, and this is not this was in the Jerusalem Post, and they said that, in Israel, they don't know if they should call themselves the chosen people anymore. Because of all the elections, maybe they should be called the choosing people. So anyway, get this document and you'll learn a lot more, but here's how it relates to what's going on, because this thing with Hezbollah, you have the Leviathan field, the other fields, and they're starting drilling out there. Hezbollah launched 3 drones towards the drilling platforms the other day. Now, they were shot down. It doesn't appear that they were armed in any way. But understand, this is how the Iranians negotiate. So they're trying to negotiate the Iranian deal, and they're trying to tell Israel, okay, Israel, you're thinking about coming here and maybe assassinating some more people or blowing up some more of our stuff? We're going to take out your oil platform. And we got a bunch of, drones and missiles and everything that can hit your platform out there in the Mediterranean. And we'll take out your gas. We'll see how you like that. So this is ramping up. This was a big deal act. But what Israel did was, you can get the video, modern warfare is kind of neat in a way because now you can see everything that you didn't used to be able to see. And I don't know, it's kind of frightening in a way too, the precision of these things. So these are the Israeli missiles launched from a missile boat in the Mediterranean and also from some fighter aircraft to take out these drones. But pay attention to that. That is a big deal. So the Karish gas rig, which I showed you a couple weeks ago, was taken through the Suez Canal and put up there to start drilling. Hezbollah made some threats, and then some people said, well, they weren't really threatening anything. They were threatening. They proved that this week. So I know you want to ascribe good motives to this, and that Nasrallah, was just having a bad day, and he was on a little bit of a rant, which he seems to do like an hour-and-a-half rant every other day, if you follow it. But this is kind of a big deal. Coming just before Biden goes to the Middle East to ask the Saudis, what do you want us to do? So, because we need your gas and oil. This is all really coming together very quickly. Very, very quickly. So I'll try to do a midweek this week. Again, Tuesday on Stand Up for the Truth with David Fiorazzo. And let's, ultimately I'm a positive guy. I think this all works out in the end. But it's going to be bumpy until then. The problems with the airlines are sort of a metaphor for all the other stuff that's going on. So let's pray. Lord, we just pray, Lord, that you will keep us anchored to the truth of the Word of God. And Lord, I pray for these people that we talked about today, that you will bring someone into their life that will share with them the glorious gospel of Jesus Christ, and that they will turn to Jesus and away from this demonic stuff that they're into. I just pray that you will give people opportunities to that. And those people that do that, protect them. Give them a hedge of protection and a sense of boldness to do what needs to be done, to share the gospel with these people. But also pray for people that are trying to fight against this, to protect people like Chloe. Lord, I pray she finds a good church and pastor and people to come around her and help her for the rest of her life. I just pray that you will give us all those opportunities. Bless us this week. In Jesus' name, amen.